What you're about to hear are real accounts from real people. Names have been changed to protect their identities, but the experiences remain untouched. These are stories that changed lives forever. Stories that challenge everything we think we know about our place in the universe. Before we begin, if you're fascinated by the unexplained, by encounters that defy logic, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming. And if this video gives you chills, leave a like to help others find these stories. Now let's dive into the unknown. The night was supposed to be ordinary. Michael Torres, a long-haul truck driver with 15 years on the road, had seen countless sunrises from behind the wheel. He'd driven through blizzards, thunderstorms, and fog so thick you could cut it with a knife, but nothing prepared him for what happened on Interstate 40, somewhere between Flagstaff and Albuquerque, on a crisp October night in 2019. It was around 2:30 in the morning. The highway stretched endlessly before him, illuminated only by his headlights cutting through the darkness. The radio crackled with static, something that happened often in these remote stretches. Michael reached to adjust the dial when his entire truck suddenly lost power. The engine died, the lights went out, even his phone went black. His rig coasted to a stop on the shoulder, and for a moment, Michael sat in complete silence. Then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The darkness outside wasn't just the absence of light. It was wrong, too complete, too consuming. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove box, but it wouldn't turn on. The batteries were new. He'd replaced them just 2 days ago. His heart pounding, Michael opened the door and stepped out onto the asphalt. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees. He could see his breath forming clouds in the air. That's when he looked up. Above the highway, hovering no more than 200 feet in the air, was something that shouldn't exist. A massive triangular craft, completely silent, with 3 brilliant white lights at each corner and a pulsating red light in the center. The object was enormous, easily the size of a football field, blocking out the stars behind it. Michael stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. The craft began to rotate slowly, and as it did, he felt something he couldn't quite explain. A pressure in his head, a buzzing sensation that seemed to vibrate through his entire body. Time felt strange, elastic. He couldn't tell if seconds or minutes were passing. The surface of the craft seemed to shift and shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. But this was different. The air itself appeared to bend around the object, creating a distortion that hurt to look at directly. Michael tried to focus on details, to make sense of what he was seeing, but his eyes couldn't quite lock onto any single feature. It was as if the craft existed slightly out of phase with normal reality. Then, without warning, a beam of pale blue light shot down from the center of the craft, illuminating the highway in an otherworldly glow. Michael wanted to run, wanted to scream, but his body wouldn't respond. The light swept across the road, moving slowly toward him. He could feel heat radiating from it, see particles dancing in the beam like dust caught in sunlight. The beam stopped just feet from where he stood. For several seconds, nothing happened. Michael felt his heart hammering in his chest, each beat seeming to echo in the strange silence that had descended over the desert. Then the light began to change. The blue shifted to violet, then to a color he'd never seen before. Something that shouldn't exist in the visible spectrum, but somehow did. Within the beam, shapes began to form. Not solid, but suggestions of form. Geometric patterns that twisted and folded in ways that defied three-dimensional space. Michael felt his mind struggling to process what he was seeing, like trying to imagine a fourth spatial dimension. The patterns seemed meaningful, like they were conveying information, but in a language his conscious mind couldn't decode. Then the light retracted, pulling back into the craft like water being sucked up a drain. But something had changed. Michael felt different. There was a warmth in his chest, a tingling sensation that spread through his limbs. For a brief moment, he experienced something he would later struggle to describe. A sense of connection, of being part of something vast and incomprehensible, of understanding, just for an instant, his place in a universe far stranger and more wondrous than he'd ever imagined. The triangular object began to rise, slowly at first, then with incredible speed. In less than 3 seconds, it had disappeared into the night sky, leaving nothing but stars and silence. As it vanished, Michael heard something, not with his ears but inside his mind. A sound like music, but not music. Mathematical, pure, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Michael's legs gave out. and he collapsed onto the cold pavement. When he finally gathered the strength to check his watch, he discovered something impossible. 4 hours had passed. 4 hours he couldn't account for. The last thing he clearly remembered was stepping out of his truck. Everything after that was fragments, impressions, the feeling of being observed, of being studied. But there were other fragments too, buried deeper. Flashes of memory that felt both real and dreamlike. A room with curved walls. Instruments that looked organic, as if grown rather than manufactured. Figures moving around him, tall and graceful, with movements that seemed almost choreographed. And eyes. Large, dark eyes that looked at him with an intelligence that was simultaneously alien and somehow familiar. Compassionate even. His truck's engine suddenly roared back to life, all the lights blazing. His phone screen lit up, showing dozens of missed calls from his dispatcher. Michael got back behind the wheel, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the steering wheel. He drove straight through to Albuquerque, stopping only when he reached the truck stop where other drivers were having breakfast. In the bathroom mirror, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. On the side of his neck, just below his ear, was a small mark, perfectly circular, slightly raised, like a brand. It hadn't been there before. He touched it gently and felt a sharp sting. The mark seemed to pulse with its own heat, warm to the touch. But that wasn't all. As he examined himself more closely, Michael noticed other changes. His eyes looked different somehow. The color was the same, but there was a clarity to them that hadn't been there before. He blinked and realized he could see tiny details in the mirror's surface, imperfections and scratches he'd never noticed before. His vision had somehow improved dramatically. Over the following days, Michael discovered more changes. He needed less sleep. 4 hours a night left him feeling refreshed and energized. His reaction time had improved. He could anticipate traffic patterns with uncanny accuracy, sensing when cars were about to change lanes before they signaled. It was as if his perception had been enhanced. His processing speed increased. The mark is still there today. He's had it examined by 3 different doctors. The first dismissed it as a burn from an unknown source. The second suggested it might be a rare skin condition. The third, an older dermatologist who'd practiced for 40 years, told Michael something that stayed with him. She said she'd seen similar marks before, on 2 other patients over the years. Both had stories about missing time and strange lights in the sky. Both had experienced similar enhancements to their abilities. She never reported these cases officially. She didn't know how to explain them. Michael reported the incident to his company, expecting them to dismiss it as exhaustion or hallucination. Instead, his supervisor told him something that chilled him to the bone. 3 other drivers had reported similar experiences on that same stretch of highway over the past year. All of them had lost time. All of them had unexplained marks on their bodies. The company had quietly documented each incident, but never made it public. They feared ridicule. They feared losing contracts if clients thought their drivers were unreliable. The supervisor showed Michael the files. Reading through them was like reading his own experience reflected back at him. The same triangular craft, the same blue light, the same missing hours. One driver reported waking up with knowledge of complex mathematical equations he'd never studied. Another developed the ability to understand and speak a language he'd never learned. A third experienced vivid dreams of star systems and planetary configurations that he later discovered matched actual astronomical data. Michael doesn't drive that route anymore. He requested a permanent reassignment to daytime routes in more populated areas, but the experience haunts him. Sometimes late at night, he'll wake up with that same buzzing sensation in his head, that same feeling of being watched. And when he looks out his window at the night sky, he wonders if they're still out there, still watching, still waiting. He's tried to return to normal life, but normal doesn't quite fit anymore. He sees patterns everywhere now, in traffic flows, in weather systems, in the movements of birds across the sky. It's as if something was activated in his brain, some latent ability to perceive order and meaning in apparent chaos. He started keeping a journal, documenting these observations. Pages and pages of notes that read like poetry mixed with physics, describing phenomena he has no formal education to understand but somehow comprehends on an intuitive level. Michael's wife noticed the changes too. She says he's different now. Not in a bad way, she's quick to add, but different, more contemplative, more aware of things she can't see. Sometimes she'll find him standing in their backyard at night, staring up at the stars with an expression of longing, She doesn't quite understand. When she asks what he's thinking about, he struggles to put it into words. How do you explain that you've touched something beyond human experience? That you've been changed by it in ways you're still discovering? If Michael's story sent shivers down your spine, wait until you hear what happened to the Henderson family. Sometimes, encounters don't happen to individuals. Sometimes, they happen to entire families. And sometimes, the evidence left behind is impossible to ignore. Sarah Henderson never believed in UFOs. She was a high school science teacher, a skeptic by nature, someone who demanded evidence and logical explanations. Her husband David was a software engineer, equally rational. Their two children, Emma and Lucas, were typical teenagers more interested in their phones than looking at the sky. They were, by all accounts, an ordinary suburban family living in rural Vermont. Everything changed on a Saturday night in July 2021. The family had decided to have dinner outside, taking advantage of the warm summer evening. They'd set up a table in their backyard, which bordered a dense forest. The sun had set about an hour earlier, and the first stars were beginning to appear. Emma was the first to notice something odd. She pointed toward the tree line and asked her parents if they could see the lights. At first, Sarah assumed they were fireflies, but as she looked more carefully, she realized these lights were different. They were too bright, too uniform in color, a deep orange-red that seemed to pulse with an internal rhythm. David grabbed his phone to take a picture, but the moment he raised the camera, the device shut off completely. He tried to restart it, but nothing happened. Sarah reached for her phone and experienced the same thing. Both devices were fully charged moments before, now completely dead. Lucas ran inside to grab the family camera, an older model that didn't rely on a battery. When he returned, all four of them stood at the edge of their yard, watching the lights. The lights began to move, not randomly, but with clear purpose and intelligence. They formed patterns, geometric shapes, first a triangle, then a perfect circle, then a formation that looked almost like a constellation. The family stood transfixed, unable to look away. Then the lights started moving toward them. They rose above the tree line, and for the first time, the Hendersons could see what was producing them. 5 disc-shaped objects, each about 30 feet in diameter, perfectly synchronized in their movements. The objects were metallic, reflecting the moonlight with an almost liquid quality. They made no sound, not the slightest whisper of wind or hum of engines. As the objects drew closer, Sarah noticed details that her scientific mind struggled to accept. The surface of each craft seemed to be covered in symbols or markings, geometric patterns that shifted and rearranged themselves as she watched. It was like looking at a living computer screen, information flowing across the hull in patterns that almost made sense, that hovered just at the edge of comprehension. Sarah tried to speak, to tell her family to go inside, but no words came out. She felt paralyzed, not physically but mentally, as if her will to move had been gently suppressed. Later, she would describe it as feeling wrapped in invisible cotton, unable to make her body respond to her commands. But it wasn't frightening, exactly. It was more like being held, being cradled by an invisible force that felt almost protective. The objects descended until they hovered directly above the backyard, no more than 50 feet overhead. The orange lights had shifted to white, so bright that the entire property was illuminated like daylight. David managed to raise the camera and began taking pictures, his hands moving almost automatically while his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Each click of the shutter felt monumental, like he was documenting something that would change human history. Emma later reported feeling something she couldn't quite articulate, a presence in her mind. Not words exactly, but impressions, feelings, a sense of being acknowledged, of being seen not just physically, but somehow deeper. She described it as the most terrifying and beautiful moment of her life. In that moment of contact, she felt understood in a way she'd never experienced with another human being. It was as if whatever intelligence guided these craft could see into her soul, could understand her hopes, her fears, her dreams, all in an instant. The presence conveyed emotions without language, curiosity, gentleness, and something else, something Emma would spend months trying to articulate. A sense of sadness, perhaps, or concern, as if these beings looked at humanity with a mixture of hope and worry, like parents watching a child take its first steps, proud but aware of how easily the child might fall. Lucas, the youngest, started crying. Not from fear, he would later explain, but from an overwhelming emotional response he couldn't control. Tears streamed down his face as he stared upward, his teenage cynicism stripped away in an instant of genuine wonder and terror. He felt small, but not insignificant. He felt seen. He felt known. And in that knowing, he felt a connection to something vast and ancient and incomprehensibly wise. The encounter lasted approximately 12 minutes, though to the family it felt both infinitely longer and impossibly brief. During those minutes, time seemed to behave strangely, moments stretched and compressed. Sarah would later swear that she saw one of the objects rotate completely in what felt like slow motion, taking minutes to complete a turn, while David insisted the same rotation happened in just seconds. Their perceptions had somehow become untethered from normal temporal flow. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the objects shot straight upward, not gradually. One moment they were hovering overhead, the next they were pinpoints of light streaking into space at a speed that defied physics as the Hendersons understood it. The acceleration should have created sonic booms, should have disturbed the air, should have left some trace of their passage. Instead, they simply vanished, leaving only silence and stars. When they were gone, the paralysis lifted. Sarah gasped, realizing she'd been holding her breath. David lowered the camera with shaking hands. The children ran to their parents, and the four of them stood huddled together in their backyard, trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. For several minutes, no one spoke. What could they say? What words existed to describe what they'd just experienced? Finally, David broke the silence. "Did that really just happen?" His voice was barely a whisper. Sarah nodded, unable to form words. Emma and Lucas clung to their parents, and the family stood there in their backyard, forever changed by 12 minutes that had shattered their understanding of reality. But the story doesn't end there. When they finally went inside, they discovered that every clock in the house had stopped at exactly 9:42 p.m. Their phones, when they finally powered back on, showed the same time. Yet according to the camera's timestamp on the photos David had taken, the encounter had ended at 10:18 p.m. 36 minutes were unaccounted for. Those missing minutes haunted them. David became obsessed with trying to recover the lost time. He underwent hypnotic regression, hoping to unlock buried memories. Under hypnosis, he described things that terrified him: being inside one of the craft, walking through corridors that seemed too long to fit within the observed dimensions of the objects, seeing rooms filled with what could only be described as living technology, devices that pulsed with bioluminescence, that seemed to respond to thought rather than physical manipulation. He described seeing other humans, not his family, but strangers, some awake and aware, others in some kind of suspended state, floating in chambers filled with a substance that looked like liquid light. He described beings moving among them, tall figures with elongated limbs and those large dark eyes. They weren't hostile. They were methodical, clinical, but not cold. There was a gentleness to their movements, a care in how they interacted with their human subjects. The hypnotist, a professional with 20 years of experience, told David she'd worked with other abduction cases. She'd heard similar descriptions before: the living technology, the impossible geometry of the craft's interior, the sense of being studied but not harmed. She believed David was accessing real memories, not fabrications, but she also cautioned him. Sometimes, she said, the mind protects us from experiences too traumatic to fully process. Sometimes it's better not to remember everything. The next morning, Sarah went outside to examine the yard in daylight. What she found made her call David immediately. In the grass, exactly where the objects had hovered, were 5 perfect circles. The grass inside each circle was completely dead, burned down to the soil. But it wasn't charred. It looked desiccated, as if every molecule of moisture had been extracted. Soil samples later showed abnormally high levels of radiation, though not enough to be dangerous. What disturbed Sarah most was the precision of the circles. Using measuring tape and geometry software, she calculated that each circle was exactly 23.7 feet in diameter. Not approximately, exactly. The spacing between the circles formed a perfect pentagon. The mathematical precision was impossible to achieve by chance. Whatever had created these marks had done so with deliberate, calculated accuracy. More disturbing were the effects on the family themselves. Emma developed a sudden aptitude for mathematics that her teachers couldn't explain. Concepts she'd struggled with before suddenly made perfect sense. Calculus, quantum mechanics, advanced physics. All of it clicked into place as if she'd always known it. Her math teacher pulled Sarah aside one day, concerned. "Emma is working at a graduate level," she said. "I don't know what to do with her anymore. She's solving problems I have to look up the answers to." Emma couldn't explain it herself. She would sit in class, and equations would just appear in her mind, fully formed. She could see mathematical relationships in everything. The curve of a thrown ball became a parabola she could calculate instantly. The pattern of raindrops on a window revealed statistical distributions. The world had become a vast mathematical structure, and she could see the framework underlying it all. Lucas began drawing, compulsively, page after page of strange symbols and patterns he claimed he could see when he closed his eyes. At first, Sarah and David dismissed it as a coping mechanism, a way for their son to process the trauma. But as the drawings accumulated, they began to notice something disturbing. The symbols appeared to have structure, rules, like a language. David, with his background in software engineering, started analyzing the symbols. He wrote a program to catalog them, to look for patterns and repetitions. What he found shook him. The symbols followed grammatical rules. They combined in consistent ways. Some appeared to be characters or letters. Others seemed to be mathematical operators. It was a writing system, complex and coherent, and his 13-year-old son was transcribing it from memory. They showed the drawings to a linguist at the nearby university. The professor spent hours examining them, comparing them to known writing systems from around the world. "This is extraordinary," he finally said. "It's not derived from any Earth language I can identify. The structure is unique, but it is definitely structured. This is language. The question is, whose language is it, and how does your son know it?" Sarah and David both experienced vivid dreams, the same dream they discovered when they finally talked about it. They dreamed of standing in a circular room with walls that seemed to be made of light. The light wasn't static. It flowed and pulsed, displaying information in formats they couldn't quite read but somehow understood on a subconscious level. Figures stood around them in the dream, tall and slender, with large dark eyes that held an intelligence beyond human comprehension. In the dream, one of the figures reached out and touched Sarah's forehead. The touch was cool, and with it came a flood of images. Planets orbiting distant stars, civilizations rising and falling, the sweep of cosmic time compressed into moments of understanding. Sarah woke up with a headache that lasted 3 days, but along with the pain came knowledge. She found herself understanding concepts in physics that she'd never formally studied: dark matter, quantum entanglement, the nature of consciousness. It was as if information had been downloaded directly into her brain, bypassing her conscious mind and settling into her subconscious, waiting to be accessed. David had a similar experience, but his knowledge was different. He found himself understanding technologies that didn't exist yet, propulsion systems that manipulated space-time, energy generation that tapped into quantum fluctuations, materials with properties that seemed impossible under known physics. He started sketching designs, filling notebooks with technical diagrams of devices he somehow knew would work, even though he couldn't explain the principles behind them. The photographs David took were analyzed by 3 separate experts. All confirmed the images were genuine, not manipulated or edited. The objects in the photos showed details invisible to the naked eye during the encounter. Panel lines suggesting the crafts were assembled from sections. What appeared to be symbols or markings on the underside of the crafts, similar to the symbols Lucas had been drawing. A slight distortion in the air around them, as if they were generating some kind of field that bent light. One photo analyst, a former Air Force technician who'd worked on classified aircraft, told David something that stuck with him. "I've seen a lot of aircraft," the analyst said. "Experimental planes, foreign designs, you name it. These aren't like anything in any arsenal I know about. The construction doesn't make sense. There are no visible seams where components would attach, no exhaust ports, no control surfaces. It's like they were grown or molded as single pieces. That's not how we build aircraft. I don't know if that's how anyone on Earth builds aircraft." The Henderson family reported their experience to the National UFO Reporting Center. An investigator visited their home, documented the landing sites, interviewed each family member separately. The investigator, a retired police detective named Margaret Chen, had been researching UFO cases for 15 years. She'd investigated hundreds of reports. Most, she told them, had mundane explanations, but not all. "Your case has elements I've seen before. Margaret explained. The missing time, the physical evidence, the psychological effects. But the combination of all of them and the level of detail, that's rare. Most witnesses see something at a distance. Few have close encounters like yours. Even fewer have physical evidence. And almost none show the kinds of enhanced abilities your family is displaying. Margaret told them they weren't alone. Sightings in their area had increased dramatically over the past 2 years. Multiple families had reported similar experiences. Some had physical evidence. Others had only memories and the conviction that something impossible had happened to them. A pattern was emerging, Margaret said, but she didn't know what it meant. Were these encounters random, or was there some selection process at work? Some reason certain people were chosen for contact. She shared something else with the Hendersons, something she didn't include in her official reports. I've noticed something about close encounter witnesses, she said. They're changed by it, not just psychologically, though that's part of it. They develop abilities, enhanced intuition, improved cognitive function, sometimes even what appears to be psychic phenomena. It's like the encounter activates something dormant in human neurology. I don't know if it's intentional or a side effect, but it's real. I've documented it too many times to dismiss it. Today, the Henderson family lives with the weight of their experience. They've moved to a different state seeking normalcy. But Sarah says you can't unsee something like that. You can't unknow what you know. Every time she looks at the night sky, she wonders who's looking back. And sometimes, on clear nights, she swears she can see them again. Distant lights that move with purpose, watching, waiting. Emma is now in a special program for gifted students, working with university professors on advanced mathematics. She's published a paper, with her parents' permission, on a new approach to quantum calculations. The paper has been downloaded thousands of times by researchers around the world. No one knows that the insights came from a 16-year-old girl who received them during a close encounter with beings from beyond Earth. Lucas continues to draw the symbols. He's filled dozens of notebooks now. Sarah and David have had them all scanned and archived. They've shared them with researchers who are trying to decode the meaning. Some believe the symbols represent a star map. Others think they're mathematical formulas. A few suggest they might be instructions for technology beyond our current understanding. Lucas doesn't know what they mean. He just knows he has to record them, that somehow it's important. The family has become part of a quiet network of experiencers, people who've had similar encounters and are trying to make sense of them. They meet online, sharing stories and supporting each other. Many are like the Hendersons, ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. All of them carry the burden of knowing something the rest of the world dismisses or ignores. All of them are changed in ways both wonderful and terrifying. Two families, two impossible experiences. But what happens when an encounter occurs not in isolation, but witnessed by dozens of people? What happens when entire communities see something that shouldn't exist? Our final story takes us to a small town in Oregon, where one night changed everything for everyone who witnessed it. The town of Millbrook, Oregon, has a population of just under 3,000 people. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the local diner is the social hub, where nothing much happens, and that's exactly how residents like it. But on March 14, 2022, Millbrook became the center of one of the most well-documented mass UFO sightings in recent history. It started during a high school basketball game. The Millbrook Tigers were playing their rivals from the next town over, and the gymnasium was packed with nearly 500 spectators. The game was in the fourth quarter, tied at 64, when every light in the building suddenly went out. Emergency lights kicked in after a few seconds, but the main power was completely dead. The game was postponed, and people began filing out of the gymnasium. That's when someone shouted and pointed at the sky. What they saw would be described consistently by hundreds of witnesses over the following days. A massive circular craft, hovering silently above the town. It was enormous, easily several hundred feet in diameter, with lights arranged in concentric circles on its underside. The lights pulsed in waves, moving from the outer edge toward the center, creating a hypnotic pattern. Within minutes, the entire town had emptied into the streets. People came out of homes, restaurants, shops, all staring upward at the impossible object hovering over their community. Cell phones were raised to capture footage, but most experienced the same problem. Devices either shut down completely or produced only static-filled, distorted images. Jennifer Walsh, a nurse at the local clinic, was one of the first to notice something else. Smaller objects, maybe a dozen of them, were detaching from the main craft. They looked like probes or drones, each about the size of a car, moving independently, but with clear coordination. These smaller craft began descending into the town, moving slowly down Main Street, hovering over buildings, seeming to scan or examine everything below them. Officer Marcus Reed, the town's only police officer on duty that night, attempted to radio for backup from neighboring jurisdictions. His radio wouldn't work. His patrol car wouldn't start. He stood in the middle of Main Street, watching one of the smaller objects hover directly in front of him, no more than 20 feet away. He described it as spherical, with a surface that seemed to ripple like liquid metal, reflecting the lights of the shops around it. The object emitted a soft humming sound, the first noise anyone had heard from any of the craft. Marcus felt vibrations in his chest, like standing too close to a powerful speaker. The sphere rotated slowly, and as it did, a panel on its surface slid open. Light poured out, so bright that Marcus had to shield his eyes. When he could look again, the panel had closed and the object was rising back toward the mothership. But in that brief moment when the panel was open, Marcus saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Inside the sphere, he caught a glimpse of what looked like an interior space far larger than the exterior dimensions could possibly contain. It was like looking into a room through a doorway, except the room couldn't fit inside the sphere. The physics didn't make sense. And in that impossible space, he saw figures, not human, moving with purpose among what looked like displays or controls. They were aware of him. He could feel it. One of them turned to look directly at him, and Marcus felt a moment of connection, of communication without words. Then the panel closed and the moment was gone. Throughout the town, people were having similar encounters. The smaller craft seemed to be conducting some kind of systematic examination of Millbrook, moving from building to building, street to street. Some people reported feeling drawn to go outside, as if compelled by an invisible force. Others locked themselves indoors, terrified by what was happening. Pastor William Grant stood outside his church with several dozen congregation members who had been at an evening service. They watched as one of the spheres hovered over the church steeple. William led the group in prayer, though he later admitted he didn't know what to pray for. Protection? Understanding? A sign that this was somehow part of God's plan? The sphere remained above the church for nearly 5 minutes before moving on. During those 5 minutes, something profound happened to the congregation. Multiple witnesses reported feeling a presence, not threatening, but overwhelming in its power and scope. Some described it as being in the presence of the divine, an experience of transcendence that brought tears and trembling. Others felt they were being evaluated, measured against some unknown standard. William himself experienced what he could only describe as a vision. He saw the earth from space, beautiful and fragile. He felt the interconnectedness of all life, the precious improbability of consciousness emerging from matter. And he understood, in a way beyond words, that humanity was being watched by something that cared about our survival, our growth, our evolution into something more than we currently were. At the elementary school, night janitor Robert Chen watched from a window as 3 of the objects moved across the playground. They paused over the swing sets, the basketball courts, the small garden the students maintained. Robert had the distinct impression they were curious, that these probes were gathering information, learning about human life through the artifacts of childhood. One of the spheres descended until it hovered just above the garden. A beam of light, gentle and golden, illuminated the plants the children had grown. Robert watched in amazement as the light seemed to interact with the vegetation. The plants appeared to respond, leaves turning toward the light, stems straightening. When the sphere finally moved on, Robert went outside to examine the garden. The plants looked healthier, more vibrant than they had moments before. In the following weeks, that garden would produce yields 3 times larger than normal, and vegetables with nutritional content that testing showed was significantly enhanced. The entire event lasted 47 minutes. Multiple people timed it independently, comparing notes afterward. During that time, the town existed in a bubble of strangeness. Traffic lights continued to cycle, though there was no power. Watches and clocks ran normally, though all other electrical devices were dead. People could speak and move normally, but many reported feeling as if they were moving through a dream. Everything slightly unreal, slightly disconnected from normal waking consciousness. Then, without warning or apparent reason, All the smaller craft began rising back toward the mothership. They merged with it seamlessly, disappearing into its underside as if being absorbed. The massive craft itself began to pulse more rapidly, the lights increasing in intensity until looking at it directly became painful. Several witnesses reported hearing a sound during those final moments. Not a physical sound, but something felt in the bones, in the skull, in the chest cavity. A resonance that seemed to vibrate at the frequency of consciousness itself. Some described it as music, others as language. A few said it felt like mathematics made audible, but all agreed it conveyed meaning, even though they couldn't translate that meaning into words. Then it was gone, not gradually ascending like an aircraft, simply gone, as if it had never been there. One moment, hundreds of people were watching a craft the size of a city block hovering over their town. The next moment, empty sky and stars. The transition was instantaneous, leaving witnesses stunned and disoriented. For several seconds, silence reigned over Millbrook. Then, all at once, power returned. Lights blazed. Car engines roared to life. Cell phones chimed with messages and notifications, and 500 people stood in the streets, looking at each other with expressions of wonder, fear, confusion, and awe, trying to process what had just happened to their town. The aftermath was chaotic. Power returned to the town within seconds of the craft's departure. Cell service resumed. But the impact on Millbrook was profound and lasting. In the days following the incident, investigators descended on the town. Federal agents who identified themselves as being from various agencies conducted interviews. Scientists with equipment measured radiation, magnetic fields, soil samples. The federal presence was overwhelming. Men and women in dark suits fanned out across Millbrook, questioning witnesses, taking statements, collecting evidence. They were professional but evasive about which agencies they represented. When residents asked questions, they received vague answers about ongoing investigations and national security. When witnesses tried to share their experiences with news media, they found their calls weren't being returned. Their emails disappeared into digital voids. Some residents were visited multiple times. Marcus Reed, as the primary law enforcement witness, was debriefed extensively. He was shown photographs of various aircraft and asked if any matched what he'd seen. None did. He was asked to sign non-disclosure agreements, which he refused. The agents couldn't compel him, but they made it clear that sharing his experience publicly might have consequences. For what? They wouldn't say. But the implicit threat was enough to make Marcus cautious about what he shared and with whom. What they found was disturbing. Every digital recording device in town had been affected. Security cameras showed static or distortion. The few cell phone videos that worked showed only lights and vague shapes. The best evidence came from a handful of people who still used old film cameras. Their photographs clearly showed the objects, though even these images had anomalies. Unexplained light flares, distortions that shouldn't exist, shadows that fell in wrong directions. One photographer, an elderly woman named Dorothy Mills, who'd been an amateur astronomer for 50 years, had captured the clearest images. She'd been using a vintage camera with high-quality film, and her photos showed detail that astonished investigators. The concentric circles of light on the underside of the main craft were clearly visible, along with what appeared to be geometric patterns between the rings. The smaller spheres showed surface features suggesting they were technological constructs, not natural phenomena. Dorothy's photos were confiscated by federal agents who promised to return them after analysis. She never saw them again. When she complained to local authorities, she was told the photos were being held as evidence in an ongoing investigation. What investigation? No one would tell her. The negatives she'd retained showed the same images, but she was advised strongly not to share them publicly. For her own good, the agent said. The implication was clear. More puzzling was the physical evidence. In 14 locations throughout the town, exactly where witnesses reported the smaller craft had hovered lowest to the ground, investigators found strange markings, burn patterns that formed perfect geometric shapes. Analysis showed the ground had been exposed to intense heat, but only in these precise patterns, with undamaged grass and soil immediately adjacent. Soil samples from these sites revealed anomalies that geologists couldn't explain. The molecular structure of the soil had been altered. Silicon compounds had been transmuted into forms that required temperatures and pressures that shouldn't exist outside industrial furnaces or deep underground. Traces of elements were found that had no business being in Oregon soil, isotope ratios that didn't match terrestrial norms. One geologist, speaking off the record, told a local reporter that the soil samples reminded him of material recovered from meteorite impact sites. But there was no impact, he said. No crater, no shock metamorphism in the surrounding rock. Just these isolated pockets of altered soil. It's like something exposed these spots to conditions you'd find in space or in the heart of a star, but only for a moment, and only in these exact locations. I don't know how to explain it. Several witnesses reported health effects in the weeks following the encounter. Jennifer Walsh, the nurse, developed a sensitivity to certain frequencies of light. She had to wear special glasses to work because fluorescent lighting gave her severe headaches. But along with the sensitivity came an enhancement. She could see the human aura, or at least something she described that way. A subtle field of light surrounding people with colors that seemed to correspond to their emotional and physical states. She could tell when patients were lying about their symptoms. She could sense illness before it manifested in conventional tests. Jennifer was terrified by this ability at first. She consulted with neurologists, thinking she might have suffered brain damage, but all the tests came back normal. Better than normal, actually. Her vision was perfect, her brain activity showed no abnormalities. If anything, her neurological function had improved. The doctors had no explanation. Eventually, Jennifer accepted the ability and began using it to help her patients, though she never told anyone the real reason she seemed to have such good diagnostic instincts. Marcus Reed experienced vivid dreams of mathematical equations, despite having barely passed high school algebra. He started writing them down, filling notebooks with formulas and diagrams that meant nothing to him. When a physicist looked at his notebooks, she was shocked to find some of the equations were legitimate, dealing with advanced theoretical physics Marcus had no training in. The physicist, Dr. Elena Vasquez from Portland State University, asked Marcus if she could study his writings. What she found was both fascinating and troubling. Mixed in with the gibberish and random symbols were genuine equations, some describing known physics, others suggesting theoretical frameworks that hadn't been fully developed yet. One set of equations appeared to describe a propulsion system based on manipulating gravitational fields. Another dealt with quantum entanglement communication. A third suggested a method for extracting energy from the quantum vacuum. This is extraordinary, Dr. Vasquez told Marcus. Some of these concepts are cutting edge. Others are beyond current theory. Where is this coming from? Marcus could only shake his head. He didn't know. The equations appeared in his mind, fully formed, during his dreams. He would wake up and transcribe them, not understanding what he was writing. It was as if information was being downloaded into his subconscious, bypassing his conscious understanding. Dr. Vasquez worked with Marcus for months, trying to understand the source of the information. She hypothesized that the encounter had somehow activated latent abilities in his brain. That exposure to whatever technology or energy the craft employed had enhanced his cognitive function in specific ways. She wrote a paper about the phenomenon, carefully anonymizing Marcus's identity, but it was rejected by mainstream journals. Too speculative, the reviewer said. Too fantastic to be credible. The town's children were affected most strangely. In the month after the incident, test scores at the elementary school showed a statistically impossible improvement in science and mathematics. Teachers reported students asking questions far beyond their grade level, displaying intuitive understanding of complex concepts. Child psychologists brought in to evaluate the students found nothing wrong. The children were healthy, happy, normal in every way except for this sudden cognitive enhancement. Principal Linda Martinez was baffled by the change. It's not just that they're doing better, she explained to worried parents. It's the nature of their understanding. They're making connections that normally take years of education to develop. They're seeing relationships between concepts that we don't teach until much later. And it's not isolated to a few gifted students. It's across the board. Every child who was in town that night shows some level of enhancement. The parents were divided in their reactions. Some were thrilled, seeing it as an unexpected gift. Their children were excelling, getting opportunities they might not have had otherwise. Others were terrified, viewing the changes as evidence of something that had been done to their children without consent. What else might have been altered? What long-term effects might emerge? Were their children still fully human, or had something fundamental been changed at a genetic or neurological level? A few families left Millbrook, unwilling to stay in a place where their children had been exposed to unknown forces. Most stayed, but with a wariness that never quite faded. They watched their children carefully, looking for any signs of further changes, any indication that the encounter had consequences beyond enhanced learning ability. Official explanations were offered: weather phenomena, mass hysteria, experimental military aircraft. But the people of Millbrook knew what they'd seen. They'd seen it together, hundreds of witnesses all describing the same impossible thing. The consistency of the reports was remarkable. Despite being spread across the town, despite seeing the events from different angles and perspectives, the witnesses told essentially the same story. The massive craft, the smaller probes, the examination of the town, the instantaneous disappearance. The town became divided. Some residents embraced what had happened, viewing it as a privilege, a sign they'd been chosen for contact. Others wanted nothing more than to forget, to return to the quiet normalcy they'd known before. Town council meetings became heated debates about whether to capitalize on the notoriety or suppress it. Should they welcome UFO tourism or ban it? Should they cooperate with researchers or protect their privacy? Tourism increased dramatically despite the council's eventual decision to discourage it. UFO researchers, curiosity seekers, and believers made pilgrimages to Millbrook. Hotels in neighboring towns were booked solid with people hoping to witness another appearance. Vendors set up shops selling alien-themed merchandise. Some residents profited from the attention. Others felt their town had been turned into a circus. The town council eventually banned tour groups and established strict privacy laws to protect residents from constant intrusion. But the questions remained. Why Millbrook? What were the objects looking for? And most importantly, would they return? On the anniversary of the encounter, nearly 2,000 people gathered in Millbrook. Residents, researchers, witnesses from other sightings around the country. They stood in the streets where the craft had hovered, looking up at the night sky, waiting. Nothing appeared. But Pastor Grant, speaking to the crowd, said something that resonated with everyone present. "Some experiences change you forever," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet night. "Once you've seen proof that we're not alone, that there are intelligences beyond our understanding operating in our world, you can never go back to seeing the universe the way you did before. You can never be as small as you were. You can never be as alone as you thought you were." He paused, looking up at the stars. "We don't know why we were chosen. We don't know what they wanted or if they found it. We don't know if they'll return. But we know what we saw. We know what we experienced. And we know that we're part of something larger than ourselves, something mysterious and wonderful and terrifying. And that knowledge, that certainty, is itself a gift, even if we never understand it, even if we never see them again." The crowd stood in silence for a while after he finished speaking. Some cried, some prayed, some simply stared at the sky, hoping for another glimpse of the impossible. Eventually, people began to drift away, returning to their homes and hotels. But the feeling lingered, the sense that something profound had touched this small town, had chosen it for reasons unknown, and had left it forever changed. Officer Marcus Reed still patrols the streets of Millbrook. He keeps his incident report from that night in his desk drawer, along with photographs and witness statements. Sometimes, late at night, he'll drive out to the edge of town and park his patrol car. He'll turn off the engine, kill the lights, and watch the sky, waiting, wondering if they're out there, watching him the same way he's watching for them. He's not the only one who watches. Across Millbrook, people have developed the habit of looking up, checking the night sky, scanning for lights that move wrong, that appear where stars should be and then vanish. The town has developed a kind of collective vigilance, a shared awareness that something happened here, something important, and that it might happen again. 3 encounters, 3 impossible experiences. A truck driver on a lonely highway, a family in their backyard, an entire town witnessing something that defied explanation. These stories share common elements: missing time, physical evidence, the overwhelming sense of being in the presence of something beyond human comprehension, enhanced abilities appearing after contact, and always, the certainty that comes from direct experience, from seeing something that shouldn't exist but does. The witnesses in these stories didn't ask for their experiences. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives until the moment everything changed. And now they carry questions that may never be answered. What were these objects? Where did they come from? What did they want? And perhaps most unsettling of all, Why were these particular people chosen? Michael Torres still wonders if it was random chance that put him on that highway that night, or if something about him, some quality he wasn't aware of, marked him for contact. Sarah Henderson questions whether her family was specifically targeted, or if they simply happened to be in the right place at the right time. The people of Millbrook debate whether their town has some special significance, or if the encounter was as arbitrary as lightning striking a tree. Some researchers believe we're on the verge of a disclosure event, that governments around the world are preparing to acknowledge what they've known for decades, that we are not alone, that we have never been alone. That contact has been ongoing for years, perhaps centuries, hidden from public view, but documented in classified files that may one day be released. Others argue that the truth is far stranger than simple alien visitation. They suggest these encounters represent something more complex. Interdimensional phenomena, time travelers from our own future, manifestations of consciousness itself, reality responding to observation in ways quantum physics hints at, but doesn't fully explain, or perhaps something else entirely, something so foreign to human experience that we lack even the conceptual framework to understand it. What we do know is that sightings are increasing. Reports are becoming more frequent, more detailed, harder to dismiss. Pilots, military personnel, scientists, ordinary citizens, all coming forward with their experiences. The stigma is slowly fading. People are finding the courage to speak about what they've seen, what they've experienced, what they know to be true even if they can't prove it to others' satisfaction. The data is accumulating. Radar tracks that show objects performing maneuvers that exceed the capabilities of known aircraft. Multiple witnesses seeing the same thing from different locations. Physical evidence that defies conventional explanation. Medical effects on witnesses that suggest exposure to unknown forms of energy or radiation. And the enhancement phenomena, the sudden cognitive abilities that appear after close encounters, suggesting that contact changes people at a fundamental level. Organizations dedicated to investigating these phenomena are becoming more sophisticated, more scientific in their approach. The old stereotypes of UFO researchers as conspiracy theorists and true believers are giving way to a new generation of serious investigators, former military personnel, trained observers with access to advanced detection equipment, scientists from various disciplines bringing rigorous methodology to the study of something that has long been dismissed as pseudoscience. The cases documented here represent just a fraction of the reports filed every year. For every witness who comes forward, researchers estimate dozens more remain silent, afraid of ridicule or professional consequences. How many Michael Torreses are out there, driving their routes and keeping their experiences secret? How many Henderson families have had their backyards visited and never reported it? How many Millbrooks have had mass sightings that were explained away or suppressed? If you've made it this far, you're part of a growing community of people who refuse to look away from the uncomfortable truths these stories reveal. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we'll continue bringing you real encounters from real witnesses, stories that deserve to be heard, that deserve to be investigated, that deserve to be taken seriously. These aren't tales of little green men and flying saucers. These are accounts of experiences that challenge our understanding of reality, that suggest consciousness and intelligence take forms we're only beginning to comprehend. They're stories of transformation, of people who touched something beyond the everyday world and were changed by it. They're stories of mystery that compels us to question, to investigate, to push beyond the boundaries of accepted knowledge. Leave a comment below. Have you ever seen something you couldn't explain? Have you experienced missing time, unexplained marks, or encounters that defy rational explanation? Have you noticed enhanced abilities or knowledge that seems to come from nowhere? You're not alone. This community is here, and we're listening. Share this video with anyone who's ready to question what they think they know about our place in the universe. Together, we can keep these stories alive. We can demand answers. We can refuse to accept easy dismissals and comfortable lies. We can create a space where witnesses feel safe coming forward, where their experiences are treated with the seriousness they deserve. The truth is out there, and it's closer than you think. It's in the night sky above your head. It's in the experiences of people just like you. It's in the questions that keep you awake at night, staring at the stars, wondering if something is staring back. It's in the accumulated evidence that something extraordinary is happening, has been happening, and is happening more frequently as we approach a moment that may change human civilization forever. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this journey into the unknown. Until next time, keep watching the skies, keep questioning, keep seeking the truth, because one day the truth will find you. And when it does, you'll understand why these witnesses can never go back to the way things were before. You'll understand why they carry their experiences like a weight they can never put down. You'll understand because you'll be one of them. You'll have your own story to tell, your own impossible experience to share. And this community will be here, ready to listen, ready to believe, ready to investigate. The phenomenon is real. The encounters are genuine. The changes are measurable. And the implications are profound. We stand at a threshold, a moment in human history where the evidence can no longer be ignored, where the witnesses can no longer be dismissed, where the questions demand answers. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, we are not alone. We have never been alone. And the sooner we accept that truth, the sooner we can begin to understand our true place in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined.